Alright, hello everyone. In the 3v3 format, which includes Asian parliamentary, Australs, and schools, there is what some would call the op block or the neg block, which is the pressure the opposition is able to exert on the government team through the successive speeches that they give towards the end of the debate. So this begins from the DLO speech, responded by the government whip, and then opposition whip, which is then followed by the opposition reply. So within this brief portion of the debate, opposition speaks for basically three speeches against one. And the only compensation that government gets is to have the gov reply speech all the way at the end. So if you were the opposition, your goal is to maximize this pressure so that it would be too late by gov reply. And if you were government side, your goal is to minimize the impact of this portion by winning the earlier exchanges and responding very well at gov whip. So, having said this, I would like to give two strategies that usually occur in these debates and then provide my thoughts. And I just want to point out these strategies are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but it's probably helpful to separate them because it kind of changes the way opposition as op block would position itself strategically for their win condition. All right. So the first strategy is to overwhelm the government whip with new arguments. Now, this is done as early as the DLO speech, and that is why it's very powerful to launch several new points in this particular speech. Some would even say that the DLO speech is the strongest because of this particular reason. So how would you make the most out of this? Don't just spam arguments haphazardly. Do it in a very disciplined manner that evolves your teammate's case. And you would do this by launching new conclusions, launching new mechanisms, and launching different ways that leverage your teammate's case in a very, very stronger way. So if the motion were on environmentalists cooperating with corporations or companies, leader of opposition may have an argument that says, oh, companies are immoral and they run contrary to the goals of the environmental movement. And PM and DPM may fixate so much on that clash and they will talk on about whether companies are good or bad. And they will probably win this exchange by explaining that companies can be made to be better as a consequence if you cooperate with them through their model. So this exchange provides DLO with a huge opportunity to run several new arguments such as A, this gives too much leverage to companies to conceal their abuses because of this veil of legitimacy. B, this makes it more difficult to criticize these companies and reduces the bargaining power that you have over companies. And C, that consumerist activism and boycotts are simply a more effective way to regulate the behavior of these corporations. So notice that this strategy added a whole lot of dimensions to the case, and in actuality even evolves a lot of the LO arguments in a way that generates new conclusions. So it's not just the simple argument on whether companies are good or bad, but it's that the process of cooperating with them makes them more perverse as well. So it's not like the LO speech was entirely useless. Its premises were fundamental in allowing your DLO speech to be able to make those conclusions later on. So the second strategy then would be to overwhelm the government whip with charity instead. So the first was new arguments. This is now on charity, which is just my way of saying you should spam the hell out of even if responses that you can make in the DLO speech. Do the worst case for your side. Argue as if a lot of the things government said were correct. And then just go even more hardline during your even if argument. The point is that you want to add more dimensions to the responsive material that exists in the debate, which of course can be very overwhelming for the government whip because now each and every issue has an additional layer that they would have to address. So again, if the motion were on environmentalists cooperating with corporations, LO can have a portion that explains why cooperation would be unsuccessful and unstrategic, and DLO can launch an entire new set of arguments based on the premise that cooperation would be successful and explain that this would divide the movement, it would eventually corrupt its leaders, it would make it less legitimate in the recruitment process, etc., etc. All of the social movement-centric arguments that show that they will become more and more unpopular. Then, as with the last strategy, opposition whip would push their framing in the sense that, oh, we had two ways of winning this debate. Government fixates only on whether cooperation would be successful or unsuccessful. So even if we lost that exchange, we responded heavily at the DLO speech to show why cooperation makes the movement worse. Then you would focus on the government whip and say that their responses do not work. And then opposition reply would then conclude and demonstrate that these responses to the government whip successfully conclude this exchange. And since this is the most charitable interpretation of the debate, then you would simply win. And GovReply simply doesn't have that much to work with at that point, since they were simply too overwhelmed with all of these charitable responses. For either of these strategies, it's important to do the following if you were government side, and this is where I want to address how you would respond if you were Gov. First, for the GovWhip speech, the teammates must do everything that they can in their power to make tracking the DLO speech easier. Specifically, you want to note the new conclusions and the new responses that they may launch, since this is the material that GovWhip can exclusively address. Second, in both the GovWhip and the GovReply speech, you want to demonstrate that your first two speakers, the PM and the DPM, have contributions that meaningfully preempt and implicitly respond to a lot of the new contributions of DLO or the new responses at Opposition Whip. So your goal then is to portray your Gov case as being very, very resilient, all the way from the very beginning, and that these standing contributions were never in doubt to begin with, even if DLO launches a barrage of new material. So if they launch lots of new arguments, then show that your model responds to these already, like how consulting and cooperation as part of your model leads itself to work in collaboration with upper management more, and this is something that PM probably likely already said. If DLO goes too hardline on the even if responses, then go back and explain that your setup and your context explain that cooperation is the most important thing over all alternatives in this debate. Because to do otherwise would also fracture the movement in worse ways as well. And these are relevant contributions that were also probably likely pushed within the problem explanation of the PM and DPM speeches. So it's not like Gov is completely helpless. It's that you want to demonstrate to the judge that these were things that were already provided in their case, and your case already adapted to all of these different ways of responding from the very beginning. All right, that should be it. Thanks and have a great day, everyone. And I hope that this lecture on Op Block helped. All right, goodbye.